nhé.
Dạ vâng.
Yes, okay. Stop Bodhisattva Sutra. Hôm nay mình học bài thứ phẩm thứ 2. Chapter 2. The division bodies gather. At that time, the division bodies of first Bodhisattva began gathering in the place of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unalterable, immeasurable, ineffable, limitless asankeyas of worlds. They came from wherever else was found.
At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the palace of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffectible, limitless, asamkheyas of worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
At that time, okay. At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the place of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffable, limitless, asankeyas of worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the palace of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffectible, limitless, asamkheyas of the worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the place of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffable, limitless, asankeyas of worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the palace of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffectible, limitless, asamkheyas of the worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
Yes. At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the place of the Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffable, limitless, asankeyas of worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
At that time, the division body of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the palace of Triyajimsa heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffectible, limitless, asamkheyas of worlds. They came from wherever else were found.
Yes, okay. Due to the spiritual powers of Dascom One, it came from his one direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding in incense and flowers of offering as offering to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Duscam One, it came from his out direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas and of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the last one, it came from his own direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers of offering to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Tuscan one, each came from his own direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Tuscan one, it came from his own direction and were joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Tuscan one, each came from his own direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Tuscan one, it came from his own direction and were joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force and bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers of offering to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Tuscan one, each came from his own direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha.
Yeah, okay. Those groups that came were invincible from Anuttara Samaya somebody because they had been taught and transformed by a Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were in irreversible from Anuttara Sakya Sambodhi because they had been taught and transformed by a star Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were irreversible from Anuttara Samaya somebody because they had been taught and transformed by a Bodhisattva.
Those groups,
yeah.
those groups that came were irreversible from Anuttara Samya Sambodhi because they had been taught and transformed by Earth Store Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were irreversible from the Anuttara Samaya somebody because they had been taught and transformed by a Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were reversible from Anuttara Samya Sambodhi because they had been taught and transformed by a store Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were irreversible from Anuttara Samaya somebody because they had been taught and transformed by a Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were reversible from Anuttara Samyasambhuti because they had been taught and transformed by a star Bodhisattva.
The group that came were irreversible from Anuttara Samaya Sambodhi because they had been taught and transformed by the star Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were reversible from Anuttara Samyasambhuti because they had been taught and transformed by a star Bodhisattva.
Yeah, okay. For long years they had wandered in birth and death, enduring suffering within the sixth path without even temporary respite. Now they had reached level of sainthood due to the grace, compassion, and deep roles of Earthstar Bodhisattva.
For long eons, they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respect. Now they had reached levels of sainthood due to the rich compassion and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
For long eons they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the sick part without even temporary respite. Now they have reached level of sainthood due to the great compassion and deep vows of Bodhisattva.
For long years, they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached levels of sainthood due to the rich compassion and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
For long years they had wandering birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached level of sainthood due to the great compassion and deep vows of the Bodhisattva.
For long eons, they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached levels of sainthood due to the rich compassion and depth and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
For long years they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths with even temporary respite. Now they had reached level of sainthood due to the great compassion and deep vows of the Bodhisattva.
For long eons, they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they have reached levels of sagehood due to the rich compassion and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
For long years they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the sixth path without even temporary respite. Now they have reached level of sainthood due to the great compassion and deep vows of Bodhisattva.
For long eons, they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached levels of sainthood due to the rich compassion and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
For long years they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths, without even temporary respite. Now they had reached this level of sainthood due to the grace, compassion, and devout of Bodhisattva.
For long years, they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached levels of sainthood due to the rich compassion and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
Yes, okay. Để ôn lại cái đoạn mình học này. At that time, the division bodies of Bodhisattva began gathering in the place of the treasure streams of heaven from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffable, meaningless chaos of worlds. They came from wherever a house was found.
At that time, the division bodies of Astor Bodhisattva began gathering in the palace of the China streams of heaven, from billions of inexpressible, unutterable, immeasurable, ineffectable, limitless, Sakya Asam Asamyikia, yes, of worlds. They came from wherever hells were found.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Dascom One, it came from his one direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the false and bad karma, all come holding incense and flowers as offering to the Buddha.
Due to the spiritual powers of the Tuscan One, each came from his own direction and was joined by billions of Nayutas of those who had obtained liberation from the force of bad karma. All came holding incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha.
Yeah. The group that came were irreversible from Anuttara Samaya Sambodhi because they had been taught and informed by the Bodhisattva.
Those groups that came were irreversible from Anuttara Samya Sambodhi because they had been taught and transformed by a star Bodhisattva.
For long years they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached this level of sainthood due to the grace, compassion, and deep vows of the Bodhisattva.
For long years they had wandered in birth and death, undergoing suffering within the six paths without even temporary respite. Now they had reached levels of sainthood due to the rich compassion and deep vows of a star Bodhisattva.
Yeah, okay, hôm nay mình học tới đây nhé.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye, good night.
Bye bye.